Namaste everyone. I am Min Prasad Dawadi, a student of MPhil second semester at Nepal Open University. Today I am going to deliver a short presentation on a text by Derrida entitled What is Relevant Translation? This text was originally written in French language and later it was translated into English by Lawrence Vanity. First of all, let me present the key concepts or presentation highlights. So here I'll be talking about the Derridean concept of translation, then the notion of insolvency in translation, relevant translation, translatability and untranslatability, the notion of quantitative equivalence in translation, the notion of strategic essentialism, the challenges faced by a translator while translating a text from one language to another, and at last I'll present some concluding remarks. First of all, what Derrida says about translation itself. According to Jacques Derrida, translation is a hard nut to crack. Perfect translation is not only challenging but also impossible task. It is both terrifying and beautiful responsibility. And Derrida himself experienced the process of translation while translating the text from uh, English to French, while translating Shakespearean drama Merchant of Venice. He attempted to translate, but he felt much difficulties. He realized much difficulties in his own words, and he shunned this job, realizing its imperfections. He further says that translation has many insolvent duties and debts. It has infinity of losses. Speaking, teaching, writing, and are meaningful in the proof of translation. In the process of translation, the translator cannot maintain 100% equivalence. There are many gaps, lapses. Only one language leaks another language in translation, like a flame or courage. It is very difficult to maintain equivalence and faithfulness. There is inadequacies. There are gaps and lapses between source text and target text, source culture and target culture in the process of translation. So much experience, much expertise is essential for bridging the gap or minimizing the gap between the source text and target text in translation. Those who can read and write across contexts, across cultures, across languages deserve to be a translator. The person must be well versed in this practice. And defect of language could also be the breach in the law of hospitality in the process of translation. Derrida talks about insolvency in translation. The words of source text, source language, and the words of target language are different from each other. They do not dissolve with each other. Derrida deconstructs the traditional notion of translation. He says that translation is much more complicated than the semantic transfer of basic information. As I mentioned earlier, there are lapses, gaps, and undecidability of signifier and signified in translation. He questions the authenticity of original version of Merchant of Venice, which he attempted to translate. The story of the drama itself is translated from Italian story, Italian context. So it was hard for him to translate the text and translate the story. The source text itself was not English. He says original drama itself can be taken as translated text. So in the process of translation, the guest words cannot dissolve into host words and culture. That's why translation is a hard nut to crack, according to Jacques Derrida. There are cultural differences, civilizational differences, religious differences, ritualistic differences, political differences, linguistic differences, and many other differences which become barrier for the perfect translation. And translation is always context dependent, context bound. And what is relevant translation? Derrida believes that there is no relevant translation because the term relevant itself has multiple meanings. This English term relevant has different meanings in German language, in French language, in Italian language. So the meaning of relevant itself is confusing. It is ambiguous. It is plural. So is the meaning of the term relevant translation. So relevant translation itself is a top job. Each translator each translation attempts leads to distorted meaning, varied meaning, and there is always the possibility of gap between the source language and target language, source text and target text. And this relevance is limited or constrained by several factors. As I mentioned earlier, linguistic and non-linguistic factors, cultural, extra-linguistic factors may create the gap or the barrier in this process. So Derrida states that relevant translation is only a good translation. It is not the best translation. It is not the excellent translation, because the best translation or the excellent translation is never possible. Even the so-called perfect translator can create a good translation, which is the most relevant for the original. So in a good translation, there must be minimum violence of culture, violence of language, and other things. So a good translation or a relevant translation is whatever feels right, whatever seems pertinent, apropos, welcome, opportune, justified, well suited, adjusted, and coming right at the moment when you expect it. So relevant translation is overall the appropriation of the best possible alternatives. So the perfect translation, the excellent translation is not possible. It is all the relative concept. And Derrida puts forward his views on translatability and untranslatability. He claims that nothing is translatable, and at the same time nothing is untranslatable, or everything is translatable. It is a relative concept. It is translatable if we are in the position to bear the loss, but the success is only partial. If we are ready to sacrifice the gaps, losses, that time we can say there is translatability. But if we expect 100% equivalence, flawless translation, it is not possible. That time we can say it is untranslatable. There is always gain and loss in translation. And this is similar to the reference of pound of flesh in the Merchant of Venice that he talks about in this text. So the concept of translatability and untranslatability is only relative concept. He further says that the fear of actual or potential loss of plurality causes concern about translatability. There is decidability of signifier and signified. It is undecidability that gives us something to decide. So the notion of undecidability cannot necessarily be taken negatively. Because of the chances of undecidability, we can have space for something to decide. So undecidability calls for opening of reference to be included to act upon. This is what Derrida says regarding translatability and untranslatability. Derrida believes that a good translation should be quantitatively equivalent. The translation must be quantitatively equivalent to the original, apart from any paraphrase, explication, and analysis. So why quantitative equivalence is necessary? It is to avoid reduction or simplification. It is to preserve the meaning, original meaning, as much as possible. So it is to avoid reduction or simplification, which would not be considered to be qualitatively equivalent to the original. The translator should try to bring the calculus so that meaning will not much be lost or distorted. So in this process of quantitative equivalence, maintaining quantitative equivalence, there will be a series of spaces that will be open for the operation of these activities. So Derrida advocates for quantitative equivalence. He also talks about the strategies that the translator has to follow to maintain equivalence, certain degree of equivalence in translation. And he talks about strategic essentialism. He believes that nothing is stable or fixed with regard to the relation between source language and target language, source text and target text. So translation is none other than transformation, because equivalence is 100% equivalence, perfect equivalence is virtually impossible. So what the translator should do is, strategically, he or she should try his or her best to give the best possible equivalence, to maintain best possible equivalence. The role of the context should not be undermined here. Though there is no relevant translation, there is no 100% translation, the translator should practice it, since there is no alternative to non-translating. So we have to translate, and in the process of translation, we should try our best to maintain the best possible equivalence. This is his ideas on strategic essentialism. And a translator faces some challenges in the process of translation. Derrida talks about 4 challenges of a translator. The first one is what? A translator has taken certain oath or a promise of not losing the, let's say, equivalence, or he or she has promised to maintain the equivalence, perfect degree of equivalence. That is the first challenge. Oath, an untenable promise with the risks of perjury. So though the translator tries his or her best to maintain the greater degree of equivalence, there is always the chance of perjury or violence. This is one challenge. Next one is the theme of economy, calculation, capital, and interest. So as much as possible, the translator should try his or her best to maintain quantitative equivalence. And this task is also challenging. Similarly, maintaining incalculable equivalence, it is also a challenging task. Similarly, translation is only a process of conversion and transaction, and keeping this thing in mind and attempting for, struggling for, or striving for the perfectness in translation is really a hard nut to crack for the translator. So he further says there is an economy to the oath, as relevant translation is relative. Perjury or violation of oath is inescapable, as lapses and gaps cannot be omitted in translation. In every translation, there are lapses and gaps. Even the most honest and sincere translator has to sacrifice certain degree of oath. It means there is perjury in the process of translation. It is almost inevitable. But what he or she can do is, he or she should try to be as faithful as possible in the process of translation. So Derrida says that all translations are just appropriations with oaths and risks of perjury. So it is a process of preparing a text appropriate for certain context with the oath and the risks of perjury. Now, at last, we can make some concluding remarks about Derridean views on translation, deconstructive notion of translation. Derrida says that translation is a decision-making process. The operation of translation reveals the act of decentering the way in which it is performed in and through translation. The good practice of deconstruction can be reflected in translation process. Translation arguments and modifies the original. Translation works on the basis of some degree of reciprocity and mutual transformation. Translation is more than only the semantic transfer of meaning or the information. Translation itself is difficult, but it is necessary. We can say we cannot live with translation, as well as we cannot live without translation. So there is always the risk of misinterpretation, distortion, deviation, tempering the meaning in the process of translation. There is the experience of oath and risk of perjury in translation. The translator should use strategic essentialism for maintaining relevant translation, for maintaining greater degree of relevant translation or equivalence. He or she should go for sense to sense translation, that is useful for maintaining best possible translation, and he or she should try to stick to the most appropriate meaning in the process of translation. So in this way, Derrida puts forward his deconstructive notion of translation. So this is all about the key points of this text. Thank you very much. If any feedback, please don't feel any hesitation to put your comments in the comment box. Thank you very much.